Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here this afternoon. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting author and scholar Keenan Norris, who will be in conversation with Eric DeVaughnn about his new book, The Confession of Copeland Kane. This event is part of the Blacklandia event series initiated in response to the May 25, 2020 murder of George Floyd at the hands of the police. As an organization centered around the power of words, one that values speaking up and speaking out, it is a privilege to be a home for these events. I am Katie Porter, and I'm Executive Director of Inlandia Institute, a literary and cultural arts nonprofit based in inland Southern California, the ancestral homelands of the Cahuilla, Gabrielino Tongva, Luiseno, and Serrano peoples. We respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Okay, I have a comment from the audience. Are you able to hear me? If not, let me try that. Can you hear me now? I can hear. You can hear, Robin. Okay, great. All right, then I'm sorry to our one audience member. Try adjusting your volume, perhaps, or I can help you troubleshoot after we get started. And now I just want to start with a few housekeeping notes. We do want you to know that closed captioning is available for this event via the CC icon on the lower part of your screen. And also please note that this is a view-only presentation. So if you have any questions, please do type them in the Q&A box, or you're also welcome to put just comments in the chat. And we will go to a Q&A session toward the end of our event. And now for our program. Keenan Norris is a novelist, essayist, and short story writer. He holds an MFA from Mills College and a PhD from the University of California, Riverside. Keenan was a 2017 Marin Headlands Artist in Residence and has garnered a Public Voices Fellowship, a Callaloo Fellowship, and 2 Yerba Buena Center for the Arts Fellowships. He serves as a guest editor for the Oxford African American Studies Center. In 2021, he published the novel, The Confession of Copeland Kane, which we'll be discussing shortly. In conversation with him, we have Eric DeVaughnn, who is a father, poet, author, and educator. He has hosted open mics, facilitated poetry and performance workshops, and is a co-founder of Innate Divinity Books. He has published 2 collections of poetry, Aggressive, The Inherent Violence of My Beastly Unbecoming, and The Beauty of Dragons. A new title is forthcoming. And also just to let you know, I will be dropping links into the chat so that you can take a look at their books at your leisure. So with that, I welcome Keenan and Eric.
Right.
Thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. And I want to just real quickly thank Caddy and thank Inlandia and thank yourself, Eric. It's a privilege to get to speak to you today.
And absolutely. We're very happy to have you here with us. And I'm so happy to have an opportunity to talk about this book with you. Folks, if you haven't picked up this book yet, you need to grab it. It is brilliant, and talk about timely and relevant. But this is stuff we're gonna get into. Man, would you like to start off by reading a bit of the book?
Yeah. Yes, I would. Thank you. We'll talk as the program goes on about the story itself and its totality. As part of that story, Copeland Kane, or Cope as he goes by, the eponymous main character of the novel, he tells his story in large part because law enforcement, after a series of shootings, both of civilians, a civilian is killed and then a law enforcement officer is killed in a protest rally afterward. And Cope is at least, suspected of being an accomplice, right, to the crime. As his juvenile criminal record is leaked, law enforcement, or Cope, I should say, decides that because law enforcement is telling his story, right, or telling a version of his story, right, that he must take control of his own narrative. He must tell his own story. And because they're not sticking to the facts of that day, he can't either. And so he decides he needs to tell his whole life story, right? The book starts in 2030, East Oakland, 2030, when Cope is 18 years old. He goes all the way back to when he's 8 years old and tells his story back up to the day in question. The passage I'm going to read to you from, though, comes from the middle of the book. And I'm going to share my screen here because this is a passage that has to do less with Cope's overall journey than with Oakland itself. And let me say also, as preface to what I'm going to show you as well as read to you, that the dance crew that you're going to see performing here, the Turf Fiends, made this video in 2009. These young men on a street corner in East Oakland, after a friend of theirs was killed in a car accident the night before. A friend and a member of their dance crew was killed the night before in a car accident. Cope here is talking about the train dancers. And these kids you'll see in the video are not dancing on the train, but you're going to see a lot of their art and their spirit, the art and the spirit that Cope speaks to in the video. It goes down like this. Mr. America walks into your BART train car and comes up the aisle like he's the president entering Congress to give the State of the Union. Except don't nobody stand up and salute him. He makes a speech despite the disregard. It's some cold, beautiful, straight out of Obama game about how all of us, black and white and brown, left and right, upside down and right side up, bleed red and blue and love the breath we breathe, the land where we live, etc., etc. The other two members of the crew low-key make their way onto the train, heads down, quiet, one with a phone that drips wires around his neck to connect to the speakers he has hid under his jacket, while the other boy loosens his limbs to dance. The boy with the speakers wedges them things between the chair leg nearest the train door and the tin wall of the train with the phone resting on top of the speakers. After I started my work with the crew, it became my job to watch the speakers and the phone as the music cued. Three boys always go in, dancing with Misty Copeland, crazy legs, and the Holy Ghost taking turns, taking over their bodies, breaking, flipping, flaring. They could be ballerinas, these boys, with all the pirouettes on point and other mess they pull off. They could be gymnasts with the wild iron cross flips and pommel horse tricks they do from the rope ties and grab bars that run the length of the train ceiling. They could be anything that touches turf with all the pixelated popping and locking, slow motion and Vogue shit they can hold forever on a train that never stops rocking. Footwork from God, balance like don't exist anywhere shit's easy. Cakewalk, moonwalk, pimp limp, church talk. Put that into some salsa and front flip to a perfect split. Boom, back. They hang upside down from the beams, holding firm with just their feet and ankles. Boom, back. And then against the laws of physics, a boy will spill into a perfect somersault, bleeding into something triple jointed like a comic book creation, come to life. A human body turning itself into whatever it wants to be. Boom, back. Boom, back. A boy who can Christ Jesus that ass from water to wine, across motion and time. I'm gonna just let this last part play out a little more.
And I don't know if people people watching are familiar with the term, but that is Buck. That's cool.
We just let these last couple, you get it in right here. I'll unshare my screen there. So yeah, I just wanted to share that along with reading the passage.
Yeah, that went perfectly. That went perfectly. There's such a musicality in your writing, and me being a poet, I would be remiss if I did not approach this from the perspective of a poet. I gotta ask, you've got so many lines in here. There were a few that I actually took note of, and I wanted to ask whether or not you consider yourself a poet. You've got lines talking about sweat, soaking my mask till it seeped through the fabric and kissed me. You are not found as the world, no longer the soft ball of your babyhood. Your smile is sunshine against midnight black skin. That's poetry. I mean, if I ever heard poetry, I want to know, what is your relationship to poetry? Do you consider yourself a poet at all?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. And I mean, it's a great compliment, from you, from a poet, and somebody who publishes other poets as well, that you would, kind of ascribe that level of writing to my work. I don't personally consider myself a poet, and so I find, it's a great compliment, because I kind of think of poetry as the highest level of writing. I feel like the compression that's required to say what you say in the most articulate and eloquent manner possible, and usually, in a much smaller space,
right,
is really incredible. And so, I feel like I take a little while to wind up.
You have that luxury writing a novel, right. Absolutely. And I feel like there is a relationship there. One of my favorite things about writing poetry is the ability to take something that's potentially painful or harsh and then create something beautiful through the use of language, however we approach that. Can you talk a little bit about how those similarities cross over into writing a novel? Yeah,
and now that you're, I want to answer that, and I also want to continue to speak to your first question, because the more I think about it, so I kind of feel like me as the writer, I as the writer am the vessel. The story comes to me, it's not of my creation, it's something that comes to me. I have the privilege to access it for a certain amount of time. I bring it to the page if possible, and and then it has another life, beyond me, right? I feel like Cope, the fact that the story is told in Cope's version of a Black vernacular, and speaking about this, the dawn of Black History Month, I think is especially appropriate. The fact that Cope is, that his story is told so deeply within his particular version of an Oakland Black American vernacular, is where the poetry comes from. Right. Again, it's not of my creation. It's not from me. It's from us. Right. That's what I want to say.
Absolutely, and that brings up another question that I had early on. There's a line: each morning, seen us sent off to below code campus where we learned numbers, cut up the King's English. Yeah. About what innocence was. I was going to ask about what was innocence, but I think we're past that right now. Let's talk about cutting up the King's English. Natural trait for us, that's something we just do. Now, can you talk a little bit about the what does it mean cutting up the King's English to people who are perhaps looking to reclaim stolen language?
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like this goes so much to, so I wanted Cope's story to in many ways be a microcosm for, a larger Black American narrative, right, or a Black diaspora narrative. That Cope very clearly has these befores and afters, and even says like there are these befores and afters in my life, before incarceration, after, before the pandemic, even the sort of the backstory to the story, and after, before, before he believes that he's radiated, and after, right? And of course, we as, Black folks certainly have a before and after. And so I think that, everything was taken from us, right? Everything was taken from us except our spirit, our music, but our language was taken from us. Our languages were taken from us. Right. And we had imposed upon us Spanish, English, Dutch, German, French, etc. Right? And every permutation that we've made, whether you call it patois or Black American vernacular, whatever, right? And all these different parts of the Americas where we got dropped off, is, another version of us reclaiming, cutting up the King's English, right? Taking from the King, right? And saying like, if the only version of us that exists in this world that we have been, dropped ashore onto is as a slave or as an ignorant being, only, seen as fit to, hew wood and draw water, or to, live in the hood and shoot each other and, shoot and cut each other, or what have you, all these degrading, notions, then we have to do something different, right? We have to remake the world, right? From the word. If in the beginning there was the word, right? That's the fundamental basis at which everything needs to be remade, from which everything needs to be remade. So I think that's why Black people have always messed with English so much. Because like one of my favorite things, if I may just say this as well, is like, I think that a lot of Americans, especially a lot of white Americans, are under the misperception that most Black people cannot speak standard English. Right. This is a misperception, right? Most Black people can speak standard English just fine. They just choose not to sometimes. Right. And so, depending on situation, so I could get into, talk about this all day and talk about the misunderstandings of Ebonics and talk about John McWhorter's, what John McWhorter has to say about Ebonics, and as opposed to the vernaculars that every people in the world has, vernacular and standard speech, but it's only Black people who are shamed for having this, this duality in our speech. Right. And so, that's, so I could talk all day about that, but,
There's a number of instances in the book where we see the main character, Cope, where he's code switching depending on what his situation is and depending on where he is and how he's interacting with these certain communities he finds himself part of. Another means of expression that we see a lot in the book is through hair. It's one of the all over, and we're both making some statements with our hair here. Let's play a huge role in this book. Can you talk about the message that that the barbershops are sending in this book? What role do they play?
Absolutely. So, as Katty mentioned in my intro, I did go to UC Riverside, both for my BA and later for my PhD. One professor there, Boris Nunley, has a book about, Black barbershops, and he, uses the idea of the hush harbor, right? That the barbershop is the hush harbor where, Black men can be expressive with one another, can be emotional, can talk about relationships in ways that either that, you know, we've been socially, you know, socially conditioned not to, in other spaces, you know, can be funny, can be just vulnerable and open. So I think that that has been part of the historic role that barbershops have played, Black barbershops have played in, you know, for Black men in a society where we've been, you know, enslaved, surveilled, etc. In all the, you know, cordoned in all these, you know, in all these state sanctioned ways. And so, so there's that. But then within that, there's all these different politics of the barbershop in the story. So like early on in the book, they're going to the Nation of Islam barbershop, right? Which, you know, I think the Nation of Islam, you know, carries a lot of different connotations for a lot of baggage, you know, depending on whom you're talking to, and their perspective. And full disclosure, like I have some of the same criticisms and reservations in OI as, you know, some of their detractors. But Cope's experience of the Nation of Islam barbershop is they're always on time. They're always well dressed, right? They are professional. You know, they always, you know, give him a good haircut. They never make his mother feel uncomfortable in the space, in this all male space, right? When she takes him as a little boy to get his haircut. And when the barbershop is, goes under, they have this, you know, period in which they're, they lose their hush harbor, basically. They lose their space of safety outside of the home. Right. And, you know, the line on the flyer, I don't know how people in the audience took that. You've obviously, you know, read the book, so it's, you know, it's different, you know where the line comes from. But that's where they go. They find this kind of pop-up barbershop that this cat has made his like SRO into, and it's totally below code and whatnot. But he's got, like, you know, a bunch of tattoos on his face. He's got a lot going on, right? And so Cope's kind of scared of him when he steps into his shop, and then the man is incredibly gentle with his cut, right? Incredibly gentle. And by the end of it, you know, the man and Cope's mom are singing along to a song, and Cope falls asleep in his hands, you know. And I wanted to put that out there as against some of the other ways that people might imagine that story could go, you know, or the connotations even that man in his very, you know, just his self-presentation would have for a lot of people.
Yes, and I really loved what you did in that scene, as far as taking the imagery and the stereotype that people might have in their head of this person, and then really softening it. And it feels like a setup for later explaining how people's perception of Black men in general, even as early as a child, this one side, and they think, and they start stacking on top of that all of these misconceptions and misnomers. Yeah. And it feels like something that we get stuck under and trapped under. And there's now this question, just different directions in my head.
Yeah.
On the one hand, one question, Jacqueline is describing at one, or Jack is describing how she's seen all these pictures, and she's just really taking us through the different perceptions that people have. When you're 5, they see you as 6. Then when you're 6, they see you as 8. When you're 8, you're 10. And when you're 1 year old and you're already considered a gangbanger. And it's a heartbreaking notion. And the other direction I went with it, I don't remember the other direction. I'm sorry, I'm getting old.
It's all good. No, I really appreciate you know, that you've read the book so deeply. First of all, I really appreciate that. And I thank you for that. So yeah, 2 things I want to say. One, just as you know, something else that struck my mind about the hair real quick is Cope says at one point, wherever they take your hair, they take your freedom, right? And again, thinking about this before and after, and Black folks before and after, you know, that is a mark of, you know, of slave societies the world over, not just the transatlantic slave trade of Africans, but people all over the world have been enslaved. And that is a characteristic mark of slavery, is taking the hair, because the hair is a means of expression, of self-expression to somebody, you know, that is in your body. It's hard to take it from somebody. So now to Jacqueline and this, the way she speaks to Cope's, the ways that Cope is misunderstood, oftentimes, you know, willfully misunderstood, intentionally misunderstood, and has these different identities placed on him. You know, as part of that passage, Cope, she says to Cope, you know, 10 is the age of darkness, right? And it's where, you know, you're, in folks who don't know, you start to count your calendar quicker than they count their own children's. And we know, I mean, this just speaks to a reality that in, you know, psychological tests, tests of perception, white people generally see Black children as being older than they are by multiple years. This is really, you know, when in this you know, this can have very specific consequences. You can think at the most like tragic level with somebody like Tamir Rice, the boy in Cleveland who was a little like water pistol, and he's playing around with it, and the cop just rolls up on him and shoots him. You can see the video. And he's a 12-year-old boy. You know, the policeman later said that he thought he was an adult, right? Thought he was grown. How do you misperceive a 12-year-old boy who looks like a 12-year-old boy to me for a grown man, right? How do you, you know, how do you assume that Trayvon Martin, 160 pounds, soaking wet, has some sort of inherent physical advantage over George Zimmerman, 240, 250 pounds, with mixed martial arts training, right, in his background, and over 10 years older than Trayvon Martin? And for the guys here, we all know that 16-year-old version of us wasn't about to hang with a 30-year-old version of us in any kind of scrap, right? So it's you know, so there's something there. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not, you know, gonna you know, claim to be able to speak to it at that level, but there's something there around the idea that, you know, Black children just are not children, that they don't get to be innocent, right? And that your calendar is being counted quicker. And this has so many, you know, tragic and poignant, outcomes that are part of it. You know, there are a lot of ways, though, in which this this misperception of the age of Black children plays out in our everyday lives as well.
Absolutely. And just to touch on that, that statement about the hair and how we're trying to control a person. One of the things you do is take their hair. That did not end with slavery. We know very well that people are denied jobs. Change their hair. They're denied opportunities. And I've been playing this song at work for my students, India Ari, I Am Not My Hair. I love it. But all excellent points. All excellent points. There's a scene when Cope is running, and he's describing playing with the friends that he makes. How just women run. A line in there where you mentioned something about, but they all had wings for feet. And maybe it's the poet in me, but I started looking at that. I'm like, okay, I hear a number of different, maybe it's double and triple entendre in there. Obviously, wings for feet refers to their speed, you know. I'm also hearing a freedom means of a stick. And so is it could it allude to I'll fly away?
Yeah, I mean, I think running plays a big part in the book, right? And so, and certainly, like, yeah, there's the idea both of running as escape, but also, you know, I'm one of the books that really has really inspired me to become a writer in the first place, and continues to inspire me, is Ellison's Invisible Man. And running there becomes eternal recurrence, right? You know, keep this nigger boy running, right? Is the you know, is the what when he wins the battle royal, gets the college scholarship, opens the boxes, right? He has the scholarship, and that's, you know, that's the message that's written on it, right? And so there, it's like he thinks he's escaping, but he's always escaping into some different version of the same dilemma, right? So so running to me also, you know, signifies, you know, you can't really escape the, you know, the kinds of things that Cope is dealing with. They're not escapable within really within, you know, America. They're not escapable. So it speaks to that. At the same time, the running also, and this, you know, speaks to something later in the book, running is paradoxical because on the one hand, Black people and Black men have been so associated with our physicality, with prowess in sports, etc. And Cope's a good athlete, that it can almost seem like a, you know, like you're just playing into a stereotype, you know, to take on that as an identity. My dad was a really good athlete, but he refused to ever speak to other men about sports as a you know, to get to know them at least, you know, because he's like, that's what people associate us with, you know. He's like, I don't want to, you know, play into that. At the same time, though, Cope also comes to realize that whereas when he goes to the private school, you know, the people in the private school kind of want him to intellectualize his Blackness and the conditions that, you know, that he faces, that like he just needs a relationship with himself. He needs to know himself, you know. He doesn't need to explain himself to people who, you know, shouldn't need him to explain himself in the first place, right? And ultimately, you know, and over and above whatever they need, like what he needs is to know himself, and running takes him deeply inside of himself. And so there's this other idea that running is not escape, but it's a confrontation with what is inside, the direct opposite of escape.
Right. You mentioned your father.
Yeah.
Cope's father in this book is a special character. Love that you made him an inventor, so outspoken and so set and determined to do what he believed was necessary to protect his family. And if that meant when there's protests going on, you stay your butt inside. From that. That made me wonder something. What are your thoughts about being a father, and also, and I'm not sure if you're a father, but what are the idea of being a father, and then also having a sense of responsibility to the community? I know there are fathers who are activists, like Sean King, regularly receives threats, and not going to stop what he's doing. These threats come against his family. Do you feel like there is a greater sense of responsibility to one or the other? And then like there is a reasonable means of creating balance between the two?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I'm not a father. But I think I have some insight into this nonetheless, you know, for various reasons. And so do I think that, so how do you kind of weigh in the balance, the social responsibility and the familial? Yeah, I mean, I think one's primary responsibility is to their family, in my opinion. But I think that, as children become older and they start to engage the outside world, right? The father's responsibility, the parent's responsibility is in part to like show them, to model for them how to engage a world beyond the family, beyond hopefully the safety of the family, if the family's safe, right? And in doing that, it's about like, how do you engage the outside world? How do you maintain enough safety within the home while also engaging this inherently unsafe world, especially if you're Black, right? Especially if you are of any of the many marginalized communities, right? Black or otherwise, right? How do you do that? And I think this is something both Cope and his father struggle with, because it's not altogether possible, in my opinion.
Right.
You tell me what you think. You're the father between us, so but I don't think it's totally possible.
I agree with you, and I struggle with that myself. I feel like I definitely have a sense of responsibility to my community, to be active when possible, but I also know that there's no good being done if I take myself out of my daughter's life.
Right.
Put myself in a position to where I cannot be good to her. So there's definitely a struggle with maintaining that balance. One of the things that Cope deals with is listening to his father's description of the mold and how it's taking over the city. And Cope comes up with this idea to help get rid of the mold. And that seems to just really, and he's got the best intentions, but now we're getting into this idea of environmental injustice. Really appears in the book. And this takes Cope to Treasure Island.
Yeah.
There's so much going on in this book.
I can talk about it. First of all, Cope says, there's he says, he wants to end environmental injustice in East Oakland. He says there's a lot of environment, even more injustice, because there's a lot of East Oakland, a lot of environment, and even more injustice, right? And that's the truth, right? There's we all want to do our part. We all want to, maybe not all of us, but most of us, I think, want to make, our environment better locally and hopefully beyond that. But there's a whole lot of it. And the world is probably inherently unjust. It's certainly structurally unjust, whether inherent or not, it's structurally unjust, obviously. And so the convergence, the intersection of those two things, creates the environmental situations that we have. Treasure Island specifically, that's not fiction. That's fact. Treasure Island sits between Oakland and San Francisco, and it is a nuclear polluted zone. That's why I put the phone number in the book, because it's real.
We love it. I wanted to, oh my goodness, my notes are just shifting on me without my permission. What's that? So you wrote this book in 2015. And what's mind-blowing about this is you're talking about ghetto flu, which seems like it has a direct correlation to what we're going through for the last couple of years. You're talking about shootings that happen. The crazy thing about this is it's so relevant right now. There has to be a level of frustration having started writing this so long ago, not that 15 years, all that, but you're jumping forward in the future. Can you talk about writing in the future to tell stories in the past and to reflect current today? Current time.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I can. I mean, I think we live in our moment, but we also live in, we don't live solely in this moment. We live within a context, and that context reaches back in time, and it also is the product of our anticipation of the future. So we live, beyond our moment, right? As Whitman said, we're not contained between our hat and our boots. And so I think given that, you know, stories should be capacious like that. They should, you know, they should tell the stories that span, great distance, great amounts of time, at least intellect, within the character's mental scape, if not, the plot itself. So I wanted Cope to have a real, real, notion of some Black history. And that certainly, he'll just mention things offhand that are, important points in time in Black history. He's doing that pretty much constantly throughout the book. And I think that, Black people, especially because our history was, so much of our history before 400 years ago or whatever was cut off from us for so long, right? History is especially important to us. History is especially important to us. And so I think that's important. At the same time, the near future, I wanted to set the book in the near future because I wanted people to have to reckon with what the logical progression of where we're at right now, or where we were at in 2015, where we were at in 2016, 17, 18, when I was writing this book, 2019, 2020, where that's going to take us.
Right.
So yeah, it wasn't that hard to imagine, fires that were going to have people masking up. It wasn't that hard to imagine a killer virus that, this isn't even the first killer virus in my lifetime that, right, disproportionately kills Black and brown people. Yeah. I sort of remember one from, that started in the 80s, or we learned about in the 80s, came a cropper when I was a little kid, so, nuts. And then unfortunately, the police shootings, I mean, I'm thinking about KRS song, right? My grandfather dealt with the cops, right? My father dealt with the cops. When's it gonna stop, right? So it's not, so I didn't, have a crystal ball. I just walked up and down the street and kept my eyes open, right? So.
Exactly. That's the job of the writer, right?
Yeah.
I have one more question, I think, before we go to the audience. Audience, if you have questions, please prepare those. There's a Q&A section. You can drop them there. And there's, like I said, there's so many themes that you so masterfully address in this book. Another significant one is the question of gentrification. We see how Cope reacts to his neighborhood changing, how it affects school. My question for you is, having lived in for the last, for 20 years?
Pretty much, yeah.
Having lived in Oakland, what is the tone in Oakland with the gentrification, watching this shift?
Yeah, I started to really notice the phenomenon and the really strong presence of gentrification, really starting with the recession. There were a lot of Black businesses in downtown Oakland before the recession. There were virtually none after the recession. A couple sprang up more recently and got killed by this most recent pandemic recession. So I noticed that the population of downtown and the lake area and all that started to dramatically shift, about 10 years ago, to where like that area was like 80% Black, let's say, and now it's, 80% white, and so the and then the pandemic's been really interesting because right before the pandemic, there was a huge boom in like luxury loft buildings in that part of Oakland. And a lot of those buildings are, to this day, unoccupied because of the pandemic, because they're just too expensive. And people don't have, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month of bust on rent,
What?
Yeah. And so, so it's, it's just like, who are you building this for? Who is, who's going to live here? And, I even know of situations where the rent might be, relatively reasonable, but then security deposit will be like 3-4 times the rent, like a $10,000 security deposit. And and the point of that is to, it's an eviction. They haven't been in, so it's not an eviction note, but it's a do not trespass sign, basically. Like, it's keeping people out. And so, there's a lot of different crazy schemes. Unfortunately, the Bay is a beautiful place, just as California in general is, just as America is, but it's also land that is greatly contested.
Absolutely.
And this is the strange fruit of that contest.
Yeah, and you mentioned that eviction notice or no trespassing sign. There's that moment when Cope comes home and he sees this flyer, and it's just informing the residents that the rent at the Rockland, which is his complex, is going to double or triple even possibly within the next year. And as long as the owners have given 60 days notice, they're within their rights to do so. And
I could, like, the thing is, I know stories that are way worse than that. I know people who had their rent raised like that over a weekend while they were out of town. And they're trying to move them out like on Monday. I mean, I've seen crazy stuff out here, Yeah, I just didn't think anybody would believe that if I put it in the book. So.
Well, I think you chose right. That's not hard to believe. I've enjoyed asking you these questions. I want to shift to the Q&A and see what the audience has. So Cynthia Damone asks, can you talk about the development of your character Cope, and if you see it as the hero's journey or an alternate narrative which is culture oriented?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Cynthia. Yes, Cynthia. Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, I mean, I do see Cope's journey as a kind of altered, an alternative hero's journey. I think that there are certain parts in like Joseph Campbell, Power of Myth, notion of the hero's journey that, Cope is doing, the kind of successive, births and deaths and rebirths of a new self. But Cope, when you get to the latter part of the book and how Cope's story ends, is not, it's not in line with those traditional building blocks of the hero's journey. So it's different in that way. I think too, the fact that Cope's journey or his telling of his journey is really facilitated by Jacqueline, who stands sort of beyond his story, is also interesting. I want the reader, as the book comes to a close, to reckon with her, her influence upon the story as well. So I did, yes, want to complicate the, kind of traditional ideas of the hero's journey. Yeah.
Awesome answer. Cindy Neisinger, I'm sorry, Cindy, and thank you for the comment earlier today. Cindy asked, are your hopes in writing this book that it will in some ways educate others about the Black experience with regards to stereotypes?
Stereotypes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you for
that. Something on the end of that question too.
Sure.
You feel like this is the type of book that people need to be reading and writing to help look towards fixing what's wrong with the world? These are some big things that we're asking.
Yeah, so my honest answer there, brother, is that, I mean, I want people to read my book, but I think it's more our total intellectual product. Your work, my work, the work of, all the Black writers who have come before us and who are coming along and going to come after us. I think it's all of us, right? I don't think my work's that special. I just think that, like I said, I just think that Cope, I had the privilege of telling Cope's story. And that story I do find to be meaningful. But I think that what would really inform people is not any one story, especially when it comes to breaking down stereotypes. It's not any one story. It's like reading, my experience of being, a Black man in California and the Inland Empire. I've, written other work about the Inland Empire and in Oakland, reading your words on it, reading other perspectives. And that in total informs a non-static and multiplicitous vision of what it is to be Black. So that's really what I think.
Awesome. Cindy has another question. Cindy asks, who are your favorite authors?
My favorite authors. So I mentioned Ralph Ellison. He's there. My dad gave me James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain when I was 13 years old, said, read this and you'll know more about who I am. So Baldwin's always stayed with me. Derek Walcott, going over to poetry. Walcott is an amazing writer. Toni Morrison, of course, Toni Cade Bambara. I learned a hell of a lot from William Faulkner's work. Sound and the Fury. I learned so much from reading Faulkner. Paul Beatty, James McBride, funny writers, Joseph Heller, funny ass writers, Right. So I love the, bringing comedy into otherwise serious topics as well. So.
Yeah. I'm looking in the chat and I see a question from Edward Jones. I don't want to miss your question, Edward. Edward asks, what would you say to young athletes that struggle with a commitment to scholarship and male code?
So first of all, so EJ is one of my closest friends. Thank you for being here on this call, EJ, and thank you for the question. What would I say? And EJ is also a professor at San Bernardino Valley College,
Cool.
And a former college basketball player. So his question comes with a lot of important context. I think, so one thing I would say is that athletes already know how to work hard. You can't be an athlete. You can't be an athlete of any, level of accomplishment and not know something about hard work. It's just transferring that from the field, from the court into the classroom, or into, an intellectual endeavor, which will inevitably require discipline of mind, retention of information, and building building a knowledge base slowly and patiently and regularly. So just like you build up for, any sport that you play. So I think it's transferring that from one to the other. I think that's about, in order to do that, you have to kind of adjust your, what you see as important. I think too, though, I think the school systems can do a much better job of privileging things that they don't privilege right now, energy in our boys, right? And our girls, right? Physical energy, the ability to be articulate in the moment and speak what you know and feel is not as prized as being able to write a 10-page analysis of The Sound and the Fury. And I love The Sound and the Fury, but which is more important to doing well in a business profession? Let's be real about it. There are all kinds of young Black men and Black women and all our folks who are not advantaged by the structure of the school system itself. And so I think both, there needs to be some meeting halfway.
Well said, well said. Before we turn it back over to Katie, I want to give you an opportunity to just tell anything you want to address about the book or about the process, or what would you like people to know before we turn it back over?
Yeah, I just thank you. First of all, like I said, it's been a privilege to speak with you. And I mean that very sincerely. Yeah, it's, I would just ask that, as Cope says, as he opens his story, you just ask that the people hear him all the way out.
Yeah.
That's all.
Awesome. Well, this has been Keenan Norris, and I am Eric DeVaughnn. We're going to turn this back over to Katie. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. I've enjoyed myself, and I think Keenan as well. But Katie, thank you.
All right. Well, I really want to say thank you both to Eric and to Keenan for our audience, and to our audience for joining us today. This was really great. I did drop some links in the chat. Please do check out these guys' books. Look them up on Bookshop. And, oh, can't hear you, Eric.
Oh, I said his. Don't worry about mine. Come on now.
Oh, no, both.
Get
How
this
about
book,
you guys?
folks.
All right. So I know we're about to close this out, but I do want to also thank our sponsors. So this event was brought to you with support from California Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And this activity is also supported in part by an award from the California Arts Council, a state agency. And I would like to invite you all to our next event, which is in partnership with the Riverside Public Library and their Humanities Hour programs. And we will have a conversation between authors Isabel Quintero and Cassandra Lopez, who will be discussing writing about place. So I'm going to drop the link for that also in the chat if you'd like to RSVP. And until then, I wish you all well, and I hope to see you here, and we will all hopefully stay safe and see each other again in this space before too long. So thanks again, Eric and Keenan, and have a good rest of your Sunday. Okay. Bye, you guys.